Before she could tell him the great news, her husband left her. One day, Laura's husband had left her completely out of the blue. It was unexpected, and she was absolutely heartbroken. One of the worst parts about the whole thing was that Laura had her own exciting news to share before everything came crashing down around her. However, she ended up getting her revenge. For a long time, Laura assumed her marriage was a happy one. That is, until one day, Laura came home to find a note written for her from her husband, Jack. Jack had left Laura for her sister, and he thought the right thing to do was write Laura a letter. But he didn't know what had happened at the time he was writing the note. Laura threw him a massive curveball he could never have seen coming. What exactly did she have up her sleeve? As she was reading the letter her husband left her, Laura was having a really hard time keeping it together. All she could think was, well, that's the end of a 7-year marriage. Her reaction is only natural. Most everyone in her position would also feel the same way. She was seriously struggling with absorbing the words she was reading. To top it off, Jack started his letter by addressing her dear wife. The letter began with him telling her that he was leaving her forever. Why didn't he just tell her in person? The finality of the statement and the bluntness of it seemed so drastic and out of nowhere. Laura had no idea that Jack was feeling that way. She realized how terrible their communication was if she was oblivious to problems that existed between them. Before she got home, Laura was in a great mood due to the amazing news she had just gotten. Laura was on cloud 9, simply ecstatic with her recent discovery. Unfortunately, her mood dissipated right as she pulled into her driveway. She couldn't wait to share the news with her husband, but she got home to find the surprising confession laid out on the kitchen table. That surely put a damper on her mood, not to mention she wasn't in the mood to share her exciting news anymore, with Jack, let alone anyone. Not only was her husband leaving her, but he was leaving her for her very own sister. Jack's letter claimed he was a good man and husband to Laura for all 7 years of their marriage, and yet he had nothing to show for it. He also wrote that the previous 2 weeks had been terrible for him. When Laura's boss called to say she had just quit her job, that was the last straw for Jack. He decided enough was enough, and he was out. But that wasn't all. Jack had a lot to say, and so he wrote. In the letter, Jack said that the week before, Laura came home and hadn't even noticed that Jack had a new haircut and was wearing a new pair of silk boxers. He complained that Laura ate her dinner in 2 minutes and then went straight to bed after watching her soap shows. He wrote about how Laura didn't tell she loves him anymore and how he didn't want anything that connects them as a married couple. Jack ended the letter with the accusation that Laura either cheated on him or she didn't love him anymore. He wrote that it didn't matter which it was since he was gone. Then he signed the letter, "Your ex-husband." If that wasn't bad enough, the worst part of the letter was coming up. Jack added a postscript that told Laura not to try and find him since he and her sister were moving to West Virginia together. Can you believe it? By this point, Laura had been having such a good day, but the letter of betrayal left by her husband was too much for her. Not only because her husband of 7 years had left her, but because he was leaving her for her own sister. As it turns out, the letter from Jack came to Laura at the perfect time. If he had waited just one more day to write that letter, Laura wouldn't have known about how he really felt. She wouldn't have known about him cheating on her with her sister. You might be wondering what the amazing news Laura had just gotten was. Well, it's quite extraordinary to say the least. We'll give you a hint. It involves money, and a lot of it. Let's see what her big secret was. Well, she had just won the lottery. The lottery. So even though she was upset and hurt from the letter and losing her husband, she was also happy that she won the lottery and now had loads of cash. When they first met, Laura and Jack were in college. However, they didn't have a special connection at first. Even though they were studying for exams together and spent a lot of time in the library, nothing happened at first. Jack ended up dropping out of college and became a bartender. Neither Jack nor Laura had any idea that their love story wouldn't last forever. When they first met, they came from totally opposite places in life. Maybe this led to the ultimate downfall of their marriage. Laura came from a wealthy family and was working hard studying in college. On the other hand, Jack had a part-time job as a bartender and didn't really have any ambitions otherwise. Laura's parents were not for her and Jack getting married at all. From the beginning of their relationship, Laura's parents didn't approve of her and Jack together since they wanted Laura to have more than Jack was able to offer. However, it was too late by then. Laura was already in love with Jack and didn't care about what her parents thought. Jack was convinced his love for Laura was enough, since she was stubborn and wouldn't let Jack go easily. While Laura's parents didn't approve of their relationship at all, they put too much pressure on Laura, leading her to push back against them. So Laura decided to move in with Jack. However, 7 years later, her biggest regret was not listening to her parents all those years ago. After everything that transpired, parents really do know best. Right after Laura graduated college, she moved into Jack's one-bedroom apartment with him. Everything was seemingly going great. However, things slowly took a turn. It was all so new for the recent college graduate. While Jack was used to his apartment, it was small and grimy. The paint on the walls was all old and jaded. The heater never worked, and the maintenance level was low. All the same, Laura held on to the hope that made her believe things would all get better in time. She was also enthusiastic about everything since she had never lived with a boyfriend before. It was all so new to her. Laura finally felt like her life was coming together. She had met the love of her life, little did she know. Laura felt like the least she deserved was for Jack to discuss his feelings with her in person, but it was already too late for that. However, Laura still wanted to tell Jack the good news, but now all she could think about was the bombshell. She wanted to tell him how big of a mistake he made. She felt like getting revenge. Throughout their years of financial struggles, Laura always hoped she would get lucky with the lottery. It seemed it came at the perfect moment. This story could have been very different. It could have been a love story about two people overcoming difficulties to stay together and make their marriage work, living happily ever after. But this isn't one of those stories. Over time, Jack and Laura's marriage began to crumble. The relationship was beautiful while it lasted, but it came to an end, just like other good things do. Sometimes it's the mundane, everyday aspects of life and the relationship itself that bring it to an end. Before she read the letter Jack wrote to her, Jack meant the world to Laura. All she ever wanted was to be with him, even if he couldn't provide her with the life she grew up with and was used to. Since they got together, the couple had to be careful and safe with money. That's when Laura agreed to help Jack financially. She got a waitressing job at a restaurant near the apartment. A few years later, however, she began getting suspicious. Laura just wanted to spend all her time with Jack, so she frequently went to visit him at the bar he worked at. The main reason she did this was to spend some more time with him, but after a while of doing this, she began seeing hints that Jack might be cheating on her. People who were at the bar started looking at her oddly, but Laura ignored her own suspicions. As we all know, she should have gone with her intuitions. Later on, she learned that her feelings of uncertainty were more than just feelings. Throughout the years, Laura kept chancing it and buying lottery tickets, even though she lost time and time again. For some reason, she felt differently when buying this lotto ticket. She had faith in this ticket and its ability to be a winner. Eventually, Laura won a lottery draw. She couldn't believe it. Her dedication for all of those years finally paid off. The best part of the situation was that her husband left her before she got the chance to tell him. After winning, the first thing she did was book 2 tickets to Hawaii for her and Jack to celebrate the win. However, as soon as she read the letter from him, she obviously didn't want to go on holiday with him or see him ever again. She wanted to make him see that he wasn't going to get a single cent of her lotto money, and that she didn't want him back either. Go, girl, go. We can't even believe Jack's shock after hearing the news. He was probably banging his head against a wall. Despite being upset by her husband's letter, Laura couldn't help feeling happy about winning the lottery. She was beginning to wonder what she would do with the money. She wondered if she could travel the world, buy a big house, a fancy car, or even a yacht. The first thing she wanted to do was reply to Jack. She began her letter with the words, "Dear ex-husband," and went on to tell him how it felt to get his letter. She said that despite being together for 7 years, he was nowhere near a good man to her. She then said that the favorite meal he had cooked for her must have been for her sister all along, especially since she stopped eating pork before the two even met. However, she was nowhere near finished with what she wanted to say. When Laura saw Jack in his new boxers and turned away, she explained it was because she saw the $49.99 price tag on them and hoped it was a coincidence. Why? Because her sister had borrowed $50 from her that very morning. All the same, Laura still loved him and wanted to work on things with him. It seemed that all those suspicions she had about Jack being unfaithful were, in fact, real, even though she didn't want to believe them. Just to clarify, Laura wrote that the only reason she quit her job that day was that she won $15 million in the lottery. She thought spending time with him was more important than sitting at a desk working all day. However, once she read the letter, all that changed. If only he knew the real reason she quit her job. She told him that everything happens for a reason, and she hoped he got the life fulfillment he always wanted. Laura was seriously struggling with her feelings of rejection and betrayal. She knew she had to cope with them before she could think about how she would spend the lottery money. It was quite a lot of cash, and she needed to have her head on straight before making any decisions. The whole thing was so overwhelming to her. She had so much to think about. Winning the lottery is no walk in the park. Laura had to figure out how much Jack would get, seeing as he was her husband, so she called her lawyer. His name is Jason Kurland, and he specializes in people winning the lottery. She told him the whole story, including the letter Jack wrote to her. He specialized in clients who won the lottery, but the husband, now ex-husband, situation was something entirely new to him. Who would have thought you could blindside even the most experienced lawyers? Laura's lawyer said that since Jack wrote her that letter, he made it certain that he wouldn't get any of her lottery money. Laura included in the letter something that she wasn't sure if she'd ever told Jack before, or anyone outside of her family for that matter. Her sister, Carla, was actually born Carl. He was born a boy and later transitioned to a woman. She wrote that she hoped that wouldn't be a problem for Jack. We're not sure if that's true or not, but it's still a great way to end a letter. Despite thinking she would never win it, the possibility of winning the lottery was always such a thrill for Laura. She just kept on trying. There's no doubt that this day was eventful for Laura. Talk about a turn of events. Between winning $15 million in the lottery and then finding out her husband was leaving her for her sister, Laura had plenty of emotions running through her. Such a high and then such a low. She went through so much emotionally that day. The reaction Laura had to Jack leaving her for her sister is actually the last thing Jack would have expected. Ultimately, it was the best revenge Laura could ever get, especially since Laura told him her sister was once her brother. But with tickets to Hawaii already booked and paid for, Laura knew she had to go on vacation anyway, and she could do whatever she wanted with her newfound freedom. It was a fabulous getaway she fully enjoyed on her own. Even though she suspected he might have been cheating on her, Laura always loved Jack. It was also because of this that she booked them both tickets to Hawaii as soon as she found out she won the lottery. However, as you are well aware, things worked out differently than Laura had planned. Life always throws us curveballs, but the people who can handle them usually end up stronger and wiser. It was now crystal clear that Jack had been unfaithful to her and decided to leave her behind. She knew now was her chance to embrace her freedom and create a new life for herself. She felt more empowered than ever before. Despite her mixed feelings about Jack and Carla and how the day was a whirlwind for Laura, she was still happy. She knew her suspicions were correct and that she now had the chance to change her life. While she was in the taxi on the way to the airport, she was so happy knowing her ex-husband has gotten his comeuppance and she was now free to do what she pleased, especially in Hawaii. We commend her for her bravery.